My story begins on the night I died. I was fiercely battling for my life during the time of my soul's reformation when I realized my life was finished and there was nothing I could do about it. My world fell silent as this reality engulfed my senses, and my thoughts began to clear and shift towards the inevitable. I found it interesting that I was strangely calm as I transitioned from shouting in my thoughts to cling on, fight, and not give in, to a quiet place of submission and the matter-of-fact acceptance of my death. I found myself engulfed in a profound, ringing subsistence between the battle of life as I understood it and the physical death I voluntarily accepted. In my life, I had no fear, no grief, no guilt, and no responsibility. In my mind and body, I was delicately quiet and motionless, suspended in an unanticipated realm of growing peace. I accepted the freedom that my dying gave me, and I heard the chains that bound me to a world of expectations and duties crack and break in the cool air. The chilly air surrounded my feet and then rushed up towards my head. It was at this point that I realized I was smiling. My smile was the last physical sense I had before feeling a warm, loving sensation throughout my chest. And then I couldn't feel my body anymore, and I started observing it as a different entity. Something other than myself. As the separation began, I noticed an audible, visceral, and beautifully visual vibration that began to pierce my peaceful cocoon. A roaring noise began to become louder, and I became aware of an intense bright light off in the distance, and I focused my attention on its enthralling dance. The light's prism of energy and illumination continued to swirl and grow, and I immediately gave into its magnetic attraction with all of my senses. I started to feel the most serene, loving emotion, and I yearned to walk closer and inhabit this light and the love it radiated. I gently pushed myself off the bed, my gaze fixed on the marvel before me. Simultaneously, I made a conscious decision not to look down at my body, and I began to experience tremendous melancholy as I became acutely aware that I was no longer a part of it. I felt for the body that had carried my soul for 24 years, but I was willingly leaving it and all the constraints it imposed behind. Then, for a brief period, I hesitated because I felt the body needed me. But at the same time, I was hit by the dread of the anguish it was in, and I was scared of returning to such a state, and I knew I wasn't going back. And so I carried on. I was soon taken towards this loving light after breaking free from my physical body, as I walked into a vibrating tunnel that enveloped me and pulled me forward. My soul jumped with excitement, ecstasy, and a love that no human words could ever explain. Even though I knew I was dying, this passionate need deep within my soul for an unknown light source shocked and intrigued me. But I need more of this sensation. So I pressed on into the charismatic energy that so beautifully beckoned to me. I found myself drifting above treetops that resembled what we would call a negative photograph as I continued to focus on this amazing light within the tunnel. As the light became brighter and more intense, I became curious. As I moved through the negative woods, I began to see people's shapes and hear their incomprehensible calls to me. They were also in negative form, and even though I couldn't see them in the 3 dimensions, I knew who they were. They seemed to be everywhere among the negative treetops, greeting me with waves of impassioned support and cheering me on as I began to walk through the light. I began to go faster and faster, and the light encompassed and pervaded everything I recognized as me in an instant of bliss. I identified a memory within this sensation, as this explosion of amazement and raw newness immediately reminded me of being born. My freshly acquired cognition was eased by the feeling that this was the genuine birthing of my soul, and I was instinctively in love with and in need of this familiar spot. It was a profound yearning within my heart that I recognized, and I had returned. I knew I was back home. I was finally, thankfully home. As I traveled through the light, I felt and saw in great detail everything that had transpired in my life. I watched with detached self-interest as I relived my life and the choices and souls with whom I had associated. The bizarre sense of déjà vu played over and over in my head, and just like seeing a movie for the second time, I knew exactly how it began, progressed, and concluded. As my life events passed me by, I noticed my husband Pete and I were married. As I watched our little existence unfold in front of me, the swirling of light began to slow. I noticed a young man, barely out of his 20s, peering behind the people in the church pews as he watched me come down the aisle with my father. I felt a craving for him, and a deep grief enveloped my happy heart. At that very moment, I heard a soothing voice say, "Not now, my daughter." Everything came to a halt in mid-motion, and there was a pervading, motionless silence all around me. I was perplexed, wondering who had said that. God? I started to experience a tremendous conflict because I didn't want to go back there, not to the agonizing torture, nor to my body, which was the source of so much shame. But I kept thinking about Pete, and as I tried to figure out what was going on inside my head, it became evident that he and I weren't done with our lives, and that he still needed me. And in that moment, I realized I had to return. I began to spiral backwards in the light as I entered the tunnel again, passing the other souls as I flew through the negative treetops the minute I agreed with my heart that I was to return. I opened my mouth to yell, "No!" I flew, terrified and unable to glance back at my inexorable destination. I was jolted back into physical reality when I found myself in the dense, dark surrounds of a cold, still corpse. When my body shook and took a gasp for air, I felt myself gazing around with the caverns of my mind. As the pain flashed through my body again, I whimpered and then yelled out. I raised my arms towards the ceiling, but someone quickly pulled them down, and we wrestled for a time. My agitation quickly turned to powerlessness, and I felt my body go slack. I lay there while the commotion in the room shifted around me, and I could hear a softening in the anxious voices as metal instruments were placed on my chest and arms. And as loving hands replaced these obtrusive tools, I slowly opened my eyes and noticed vivid colors and shapes swirling around my bed. I was aware of the other people in the room, but I couldn't seem to concentrate on anyone in particular. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I can't believe that kid almost died, I thought, as I drifted asleep into the frigid darkness.